If massive strikes against Moscow continue and intensify, Russian elites may begin to pressure Russian dictator and war criminal Putin to end the war against Ukraine. This was stated in a column for Glavred by former head of the Luhansk Civil-Military Administration and former deputy minister for temporarily occupied territories and internally displaced persons, Georgiy Tuka. We shouldn't count on the Russian elites either. I'm pessimistic about their ability to eliminate Putin. It's more likely that in the event of intense and frequent attacks on Moscow or obvious negative processes caused by our strikes on Russian enterprises, such as a catastrophic fuel shortage, they will encourage Putin to end the war, rather than seek ways to eliminate him, he noted. Tuka emphasized that Moscow will be the last to experience fuel shortages. Shortages are already being observed in the Far East, and 13 regions have imposed sales restrictions. Therefore, if the shortage spreads nationwide, resources will be concentrated in the capital. However, if we manage to hit certain targets directly in Moscow at least twice or 3 times, this will be of great importance for many countries, including Ukraine's partners and Russia's allies, he adds. Tuka emphasized that hitting Moscow could break the myth of its inaccessibility and change the behavior of a number of states, for example, India or even Hungary. Yes, there have already been attacks on Moscow City and the Kremlin's Senate Palace, but back then it was limited to Muscovites asking, "Where's our air defense?" And that was the end of it, he said, giving an example. To change the mood in Russia, we need systemic strikes, which we currently lack. Therefore, in his opinion, limited, powerful resources would be better directed not at the Kremlin, but at the Russian General Staff, for research institutes working for the Russian Ministry of Defense. Recently, political and economic analyst Taras Zagorodny noted that among the most discussed targets for strikes against Russia is the so-called Yamal Cross, a nodal point for the intersection of main gas pipelines. At the same time, he said, the implementation of such a scenario primarily depends on Ukraine's technical capabilities, particularly the volume of missile production, as similar facilities in Russia are carefully guarded and protected by air defenses. The expert believes that the destruction of energy and transport hubs could exert significant economic and political pressure on Moscow. The cumulative effect of the Ukrainian strikes on ports and refineries is very significant. To provide concrete estimates, we need access to Russian figures, and even in Russia, not everyone knows the real numbers. Clearly, this is very painful for Russia, as it impacts its oil refining capacity and its ability to supply itself with fuel. And with the onset of autumn and falling temperatures, fuel demand will naturally increase. In addition, Ukraine is attacking oil pipelines that supply Russian oil exports, including through the Baltic Sea. All of this together bodes very bad news for the Russian economy, which is already collapsing, he added.
Energy ministers from the United States and European countries were holding talks Thursday in Greece on how to use a newly upgraded regional pipeline network to better supply war-torn Ukraine. According to Associated Press, it comes as the Trump administration seeks to further ramp up gas exports to Europe. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright and Interior Secretary Doug Burgum were attending the meeting in Athens, hosted by the Atlantic Council, the Washington-based think tank. They were joined by over 80 U.S. officials, European Union energy ministers, and executives from leading American liquefied natural gas companies. President Donald Trump is seeking to use America's position as the world's top exporter of liquefied natural gas to press the EU to buy more U.S. gas, linking energy exports to broader trade negotiations. With Europe already the largest market, attention has shifted to the so-called vertical corridor, a north-south gas route linking Greece with Bulgaria and Romania. Right welcomed plans by the European Commission to phase out all Russian gas supplies to the EU over the next 2 years, saying it will both starve the Russian war machine and build a growing future relationship between European nations and the United States. They have 5 pipelines that come to Europe and 1 pipeline that goes to China, he said, referring to Russia. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, EU members scrambled to modify pipeline networks to replace Russian exports with LNG provided by the US and other major suppliers. The vertical corridor relies on LNG terminals near Athens and in northern Greece. Separately on Thursday, ExxonMobil and Greek energy firms Hellenic Energy and Energean announced a partnership for oil and gas exploration in the Ionian Sea off Greece's western coast.
والشارع ده نحن ماشيين يومين في أوكرانيا يومين جارين في الشارع عربة الدعامة اللي هجوب يضربك ما لي هجوب ما لي هجوب في قرني مشينا قرني مسافة 8 ساعات في الشارع ده والله الضرب ساب جلد بدد الناس بالسيدان وكلها حاسب أي شيء ده حاسب والله في الناس.
عشنا مأساة كبيرة جدا في الفاشر، وكانت تتمثل في الدانات المتواصلة من سيارات خزائف والطلق التاعشة، في ضيق برضه في العيش، يعني كان حصار محكم، انعدمت الغذاء خالص، وصلنا لدرجة الإنباز، والإنباز انعدمت ملقينا، وكل ما نصبح المضايقات لنا كثيرة. مأساة في الشارع، في أموات في الشارع، في ناس يعني من شغف المشي والتعب والمضايقات بيقعدوا في الطرقات يطلبوكم، إذا عندكم ما تدوم، ما عندكم ما تخلوهم هنا، نساء وشفاء، معظمهم من النساء والشفاء.